All right, today we're going to unpack one of the most tangled and, frankly, disturbing cases of our time, the Jeffrey Epstein Files. This is a story that has gripped the world for years, a really dark web of power, money, and just massive institutional failures. So our goal here is to cut through all the noise and give you a clear, factual overview based on the court documents that are right at the heart of this entire thing. Let's get into it. So first off, what even are the Epstein Files? This is so important to get right. We're not talking about some single secret binder. This is a huge and still growing mountain of evidence. We're talking court documents, sworn testimonies, flight logs, all pieced together from decades of legal fights and investigations. It's basically the paper trail of a massive criminal operation. And when you look at all that evidence, it really all boils down to one central, haunting question that's going to frame everything we talk about today. How on earth did this network operate in plain sight for so many years? That's the mystery we're going to explore, using the facts of the case. So, to get our heads around this, here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the man himself, then map out the network he built. After that, we'll dig into a huge failure of the justice system, tackle the big unanswered questions that are still out there, and finally, look at the impact all these revelations are still having today. All right, let's start at the beginning, the rise of this enigma. Because to really understand the network, you first have to understand the guy who is at the very center of it all. What you're looking at here is a tale of two realities, a really calculated deception. Publicly, Epstein built this image of a brilliant, self-made financial genius who was friends with the world's most powerful people. But the reality, the one documented in the files, was a guy whose money came from totally murky sources and whose supposed credentials just didn't really check out. The public mask and the private reality were miles apart. You see, his real power wasn't necessarily some kind of financial wizardry. It was in the network he built. He systematically forged connections with top-level politicians, actual royalty, famous scientists, and the biggest names in business. This network basically gave him a shield of influence and, a veneer of legitimacy. And that powerful network gave him cover for something far more sinister. The trafficking network. So now, we're shifting our focus from the man to the horrifying criminal enterprise he built, an operation that's been laid bare in countless survivor testimonies. The files show a chillingly systematic pattern. It all started with grooming, targeting young, often vulnerable women and girls. They were then recruited into this network, sometimes even forced to recruit others, and then subjected to just horrific, systematic abuse. This predatory cycle just repeated, over and over again for decades. And make no mistake, this wasn't happening in just one spot. The operation was huge, geographically speaking, with properties in Florida, New York, New Mexico, and of course, his private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, Little St. James, which has become this dark symbol of the entire case. This brings us to those infamous flight logs from his private jet. Yeah, a lot of powerful names around them, and that's caused a ton of speculation. But we have to be really clear about what these logs are and what they aren't. As the legal documents and experts remind us, just being on a flight log is not proof of guilt. It doesn't even prove you knew anything illegal was happening. Association is not the same as conviction. So how was this network allowed to just keep going for so long? Well, that question leads us to maybe the most controversial part of this whole story. A catastrophic failure of justice, all wrapped up in that infamous 2008 plea deal. So let's just walk through this timeline. A federal investigation into Epstein kicks off in 2006. But then, by 2007, federal prosecutors are secretly negotiating a deal with his lawyers. And in 2008, that non-prosecution agreement gets signed, which basically shielded Epstein and any of his potential co-conspirators from all federal charges. Now, to really get how badly this went wrong, you need to know how the system is supposed to work. Under federal law, a serious investigation usually goes to a grand jury. And, this is absolutely crucial, the Crime Victims' Rights Act says that victims have to be notified and consulted about any plea deal that's on the table. But that is not what happened here. Not even close. Instead of following the law, prosecutors cut a secret deal. The victims were completely left in the dark, their rights just totally ignored. And years later, a federal court actually ruled that hiding the deal from them was, in fact, illegal. So for more than a decade, that deal kept him safe. But the story was a long way from over. It all led to a second arrest that just opened up a whole new can of worms and unanswered questions. Then, in July of 2019, everything changed. After years of incredible investigative journalism and survivors fighting for justice, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested again, this time on federal sex trafficking charges in New York. It really looks like justice might finally happen. But just a little over a month later came the bombshell news. Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell at a federal jail in Manhattan while he was waiting for his trial. His death immediately set off a firestorm of speculation, all kinds of conspiracy theories. So you have to ask, why was the public so deeply skeptical of the official story? Well, while the official cause of death was ruled a suicide, the Bureau of Prisons itself admitted to just shocking failures. We're talking 2 guards falling asleep on the job, key surveillance cameras that weren't working. When you mix those facts with the sheer number of powerful people his testimony could have dragged into the light, well, you get a perfect storm for public doubt. But Epstein's death didn't end the story. Not by a long shot. In fact, it brings us right up to today and the ongoing impact of this case, which is now all about the unsealing of these files. The years since he died have been packed with major events. In 2021, his key partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, was convicted for her central role in the whole trafficking network. And then, starting in 2023, the courts began unsealing thousands and thousands of pages of documents, which brought the case roaring right back into the headlines. And look, just like with the flight logs, we have to be super careful and precise here. A name showing up in these unsealed documents is not automatic proof that someone did something wrong. These files have depositions, they have allegations, lists of potential witnesses. It's not a guilty list. Context is absolutely everything. All of this brings us to our final section, a system on trial. Because at the end of the day, the legacy of the Epstein case is about so much more than just one person. You know, when you step back and look at the whole picture, the shadowy wealth, the access to incredible power, the repeated, blatant failures of the justice system, what the Epstein Files really show us is a test of the very systems that are supposed to protect the vulnerable. This case has forced a global conversation about trafficking, about accountability for the elite, and about victims' rights. The files revealed a system that completely and utterly failed. The question